this is Shadrach. This is a new video series called In the Mind of Shadrach, where regardless if you're a fan, a hater, a detractor, or someone who has me blocked on Twitter and Instagram, especially I would hope that those individuals would see these videos and get a general idea as to what goes on in the mind of Shadrach. And in this first episode, I'm going to talk about why I feel the way I do about the entire concept of depression and anxiety. As to why at times it comes off as if I'm either indifferent, ignorant, or, how should I put it to you, a little hard on those that have depression and anxiety. And basically to give you a generalized idea as to how I came to this realization. Now, please understand, my reasons, you must understand why I feel the way I do about depression and anxiety. Now, the first reason relates to my upbringing. Both of my parents are boomers, as in they were from the boomer generation. And the boomer generation did not necessarily see depression as a serious thing. In fact, the medical science behind depression at the time of the boomer era, the boomers from 1945 to 1965, and they grew up in the 70s and 80s, the boomers did not necessarily see depression as anything serious. They saw it as a sign of weakness and a sign of attention seeking and things like that. Now, I'm not saying that directly. I'm just saying this how the boomers saw it. Now, the preceding generation, called the greatest generation, like I said, the greatest generation, because they took us through the Great Depression and World War II, hence greatest generation, although they had some problems there, largely influenced the boomer generation's perception of depression. Depression in this case being not the economic depression that the greatest generation grew up with, but the mental illness of depression. Now we've got that clarified. And the thing is that the boomers were inspired by the greatest generation. I gave you again. They took us through World War II and all that stuff. And they basically saw depression, as in the illness, as either attention seeking or just momentary sadness and weakness. And they did not fully understand what depression was all about, because the research was not as conducted as it is today. In fact, even medical doctors back then didn't care about depression. They just saw it as just momentary sadness. Oh, you'll get over it, you're better, blah, 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 things like that. Now, in the sense of how this impacted me, these thinkings impacted me, I grew up in my childhood home. My parents were both boomers, and my grandparents were from the greatest generation, having grown up and lived through World War II and things like that. And their understanding of depression in the mental illness sort of thing was that you didn't have time to be sad. You either grinned it and bared it, And if you didn't, you literally got an ass whooping. It was like their method of solving it was just beating it out of you. Not that I had been, not that I had that sort of, you know, punishment, for lack of a better term, for depression, and I'll get on that later as to why I never did. They basically saw like the mental illness of depression and anxiety as you are either attention-seeking, weak, or just a momentary lamentations. And you were either told to get over it or bang, bang, bang. Bang, 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 like that. So you gotta understand that the generational differences and having grown up, you know, and lived through times in my childhood where finances were very tight, I was not necessarily allowed to show any depression. If I had depression, that is, or anxiety, which goes into number 2 reason about why I feel the way, or it may seem that I feel indifferent, or somewhat, can't you try being happy, or the usual mentality about depression being, can't you try being happy, or you're strong, you can get over this, blah, 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 things like that. I've never had depression before. I never had it. Now, I'm very thankful I never did. And if I did show moments of weakness, well, I was brought up not to let it get to me. I would get angry. I would get sad. But I wasn't allowed to show excessive sadness in the way of depression, because, let's just say, I never had it. I wouldn't know what it entirely feels like. But I do understand that it is a very serious thing. And it is a very tragic disorder that is at times misunderstood. But the reason that people, and I'm guilty of this too, look at it as just momentary sadness or weakness is that, well, the big thing about depression is a person is sad or not motivated. And neurotypicals, myself included, look at this kind of thing, this kind of illness, I should say, and we're like, come on, get over it, come on, snap out of it, things like that. Now, I'm understanding that you just can't turn off depression when you want to. It's not something you just cut and be happy. Yay! It is just, something that, like I said, a lot of people that don't suffer from it, neurotypicals that do not have depression, or people who grew up in the presence of older generations, or those who grew up in traditional conservative households like I did, largely do not see depression entirely for what it is. Now, having been a millennial, I was more understanding that depression is an illness. However, in my generation, as opposed to my parents' and my grandparents' generation, there was more research conducted into depression as to what it really was all about. So you gotta understand that my dealing with, the concept of depression was inspired by these many factors. And it's upsetting to me when people decide to block me on Facebook and Twitter and Instagram and YouTube and what have you because I don't understand it. Instead of doing that to someone, if you are someone with depression or someone who's understanding of depression, don't do that to me or anybody like that. Just what I would suggest that you do is just show them, look, this is something serious. This is a serious thing. It's understandable why you may not see it that way, but please understand that it is a very serious thing, and this is basically something I cannot turn off. I would love to if I could. And that's the thing that really gets to me is when people, that are more aware of depression as opposed that are not fully aware, or in my case, somewhat aware of depression. It's upsetting when we try to have a conversation with you and you just shut us off thinking that we don't understand or could never understand. That's just writing us off as ignorant idiots. I mean, if we are, as you say, ignorant idiots, instead of writing us off, what you should do is at least explain to us or tell us, what are we missing? What pieces of this puzzle are we missing? And how do we see the big picture? Because using a deck of cards analogy, we only have 26, you have the other 26. Would you please at least, let's put our two little decks together and make a full deck, if that makes any sense. Now, I think the perfect analogy that anyone can use to explain how you can't just snap out of depression like instantaneously and be happy and be all great. And this is something that or anxiety for that matter, I would ask and I would encourage all sufferers of anxiety and depression to use this to censor and silence those who want to say, can't you just snap out of it? Or, oh, cheer up! Or the countless other crazy things you've ever heard in the past. Tell them this. Ready for it? Here it is, right here. You ready for it? Try telling a blind man to see. Or try telling a blind woman to see. Or better still, what I'm trying to say, worded is this. Asking me to snap out of my depression is the equivalent of asking a blind person to see or a deaf person to hear. That is the perfect analogy right there. The best analogy. And I owe it to being a writer. Well, anyways, what spurred this was a foolish comment on my part towards a post that Twitter that Tinglestorm posted in regards to the topic of anxiety and depression, the test that she took, and Umi Lumi took offense to my statements because you gotta understand, and I'm gonna even say something here. I work nights, and when I get home from work at night, my mind is not 100% clear. It is not 100%, clear because I work overnight, and when I get home from work, I'm literally tired, and the one thing I need that usually helps me is sleep. And it's just, so if you see any tweets that I make around 6 or 7 in the morning on certain days of the week, I would, or in regards to replies or tweets that I've made, I would at least be appreciative if you said, Shadrach must be home from work, or something like that. Or just to get an understanding of where I'm coming from. Or enlighten me. But hey, I can't stop you. I can't do anything to change that, but anyways, this is basically my first video about Shad's thoughts. And I hope you all watch it and enjoy it. And let me know how you feel in the comments section. Anyways, this right here was my 5th attempt at trying to make this video because of a lot of interruptions. But please understand that I'm just trying to make this video to explain where I come from in the way of anxiety and depression. I'm not as enlightened as you, I admit, but instead of blocking me and writing me off as an ignorant idiot, enlighten me. I'm understanding of it somewhat in the way of what anxiety and depression is, but don't entirely write me off. But anyways, just thought I'd share this with y'all. Anyways, have a good night.